everything. I felt like a lot of stuff that I'm not used to. Ooh, who keeps texting me? To poot. I'm ready to poot. Basically gotten held on to the childhood memories. Invisible. Cool transition. Soon the study sessions. But when she met Tobias. Hey guys! Welcome to BookBabeBeauty. If you've never seen any of my videos before, my name is Erica and I love books and makeup. What I really love to do is give you a recommendation for a great book that I've just read while I do my makeup. It has been a hot minute since I have done a video. I know I shared a post on Instagram saying that my channel was undergoing some renovation, and it has, but it will probably be apparent as time goes by. I got a new mic. The mic that I was using, turns out, wasn't even working half the time. So the sound that was picking up while I was recording was just from my camera mic. So I got a new mic and I got new editing software. There was very little that I could do with iMovie anymore, and I really wanted to change the way my videos looked. So in the near future, you might notice some background changes. That is also a process, so I'm still going to be undergoing some kind of renovation as time goes on. You'll notice changes, and I just wanted to let you guys know that that is why I have been absent for a little bit of time, because number one, I wanted to get a mic that actually worked before I recorded a new video. And in fact, I have already recorded this video before for this book, but I'm always trying to show as much support for authors as I can, and I felt like the sound quality in the video that I recorded just wasn't there. And so I wanted to pay respects to this author by re-recording this video with my new mic and see how it goes. Today I'm very excited for this book that I'm reviewing. It is a great book. I finished reading it over a month ago now. It is a romance novel. It is also by an author that I have never read from before. Today's review is for the novel All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata, and I am so sorry if I butcher that name. I mean, it should be an easy name to pronounce, but leave it to me to mess it up. Mariana Zapata. That is who wrote this book today. I will say, this book was pretty long for a romance novel. It is 560 pages according to my Kindle app, and that is fairly long for a romance novel. So to start, I really didn't have any background information about this novel before I started reading it. And like I said, I had never read anything by this author before, even though she has written and published quite a few books. So as someone who strives to find as many new to me authors as possible, I was pleasantly surprised by this book. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about this story, what you can expect if you decide to pick this book up, a little bit about the characters, and a little bit about the author who wrote this story. And I am ready to put my makeup on, so let's get started. This story starts out from the narrative of a woman named Aurora de la Torre, and she's entering a new chapter of her life. After having gotten out of an over decade-long relationship where her feelings of being underappreciated were demonstrated when she basically got kicked to the curb by her ex's mother. So she left on a road trip with no real destination in mind. Her only goal was to find somewhere she felt like she belonged. She spent months on the road, doing as many tourist activities along the way as she could. But she felt a certain place calling to her. It was a place that she'd actually spent her early youth, but it was also the place that her mother had disappeared. Aurora always remembered feeling very close to and fond of her mom. So her mother's disappearance led to a lot of doubt within Aurora about what really happened. In feeling all of the uncertainties along her trip about where she belonged, and longing to feel closer to the mother that she never got any closure with, she decided that her final stop would be a small town along the southern border of Colorado called Pagosa Springs, at least for a little while. Aurora made a deal with herself that she'd at least give it a month before deciding whether to stay or move on from this small town. One of the things that drew Aurora so intensely to Pagosa Springs was the opportunity for her to try a hobby that she'd remembered her mother loving so dearly, and that was hiking. Now, although Aurora had spent a lot of her youth in this little town, as an adult, she'd spent much of her life in big cities. She hadn't yet had the opportunity to explore nature and the outdoors in all of its splendor. Just as Aurora had held on to the slowly fading childhood memories, she also held on to the private journals that her mom had left behind. These journals allowed Aurora to have an intimate look at the hikes that her mom used to take before she disappeared. Her mom had ranked them in difficulty. She would describe the surroundings, and she would sometimes recount her feelings along these hikes. The one thing that Aurora knew was that seeing these landmarks for herself that her mother would describe in these journals would allow her to feel closer to home, wherever that may be. When Aurora had made the decision to end her trip in Pagosa Springs, she'd booked a long-month stay in a studio apartment above a garage. Whether she would extend her stay past the initial month would really depend on her feelings toward this town once she got there. But what she hadn't been expecting was that the place that she'd booked online was owned by a man named Tobias Rhodes, and he had no idea that he'd be expecting company on his property. So when Aurora had showed up in the middle of the night expecting to check into this residence that she reserved online, she was met by a gun-wielding man who demanded to know why she was there. Obviously caught off guard, Aurora tried desperately to prove to this man that she'd reserved this studio apartment, but he still made it known that her presence was unwelcome. That was until a young teenage boy appeared, trying to clear up the misunderstanding. See, the teenager had listed the apartment as a way to make some money to buy a new guitar that he wanted. And the man with the gun that we now know as Tobias had previously and adamantly told his son that renting the apartment was out of the question. But, not being of an age to get a job and having no other way to afford the guitar that he wanted, he'd listed the apartment anyway. At first, Tobias was hard-pressed to even let Aurora stay the night. And even though Aurora had already submitted the payment for the entire month that she'd reserved, she wasn't exactly hard-pressed for cash. In fact, the split with her ex provided her a substantial amount of hush money. But Pagosa Springs had really called to her, and she really didn't want to leave. Seeing as she arrived in this town during a time when tourism would be at its peak, she really doubted that she'd be able to find another place to stay. At least another place this nice, and another place that wasn't a hotel. So she was desperate in trying to convince Tobias to allow her to stay, at least for a week, until she could find another seemingly less hostile place to live. I am at a stopping point, so I'm going to go ahead and put my eyebrows on off camera, and when I come back, I will talk a little bit more about this book. I will be right back. And I'm back, and my eyebrows are done. Before I start talking about this story again, I just wanted to introduce the eyeshadow palette that I'm going to use today. So because I've already done this video, unfortunately I've already used this eyeshadow palette, but I chose this eyeshadow palette because it reminded me of the cover of the book and the outdoorsy and nature themes of this story. The palette I'm talking about is Colourpop's Lust for Dusk palette. Colourpop is a great makeup company if you are looking for affordable makeup that has really good quality. Colourpop never disappoints me. Now, let's get back to the story. Tobias finally agreed to let Aurora stay, at least for the night, after she promised to basically make herself invisible on the property. She swore up and down that he would never even know that she was there, and according to her, he wouldn't even recognize or notice that she was occupying the place. She'd also made it very clear that there'd be no illicit activity transpiring. She also agreed to pay him triple what she initially did. If anything, her desperation seemed to prove to Tobias that she was running from something or someone, and well, she kind of was. Aurora's goal while in Pagosa Springs was to tackle as many hikes as she could that her mother journaled about. She knew that she was a novice at hiking and the outdoors in general, but her goal was to start with the easy treks and work her way up, as per her mom's rating of them. Aside from hiking, she really wanted to create some kind of normalcy in her life during her stay. As much as she didn't need the money, she knew that her social life would be incredibly limited if she didn't try and get a job, because that's really the only way she could think to meet people in this small town. Aurora knew that her resume experience was very limited, considering she'd basically been working for her ex, and it really wasn't the kind of experience that would benefit her in this small town. And as the days went by, once Aurora got a job working with her childhood best friend, Aurora tried incredibly hard to stay out of Tobias Rhodes' way while she was around the property. But something about him really intrigued her. She'd known just from observing from her apartment window that he appeared to live alone with his teenage son, who she'd come to know now as Amos. She'd never seen any woman coming out of the main house or coming onto the property. And the contact that she had with Amos and Tobias were limited to the waves between her and Amos across the driveway. She could tell Amos was a bit shy, but she knew he liked music, apparent because of his scheme to rent out the apartment to afford his new guitar. And music, which had once been a calling and a comfort to her, was now a painful memory, all because of her ex. But much like Tobias, Amos really intrigued her too. She was even starting to feel sad because she noticed he was often by himself at the main house when Tobias wasn't there. But one day, an acute illness placed her in Tobias and Amos' life unexpectedly. But even after that, Tobias was still very hesitant about even showing an ounce of kindness or gratitude toward Aurora. However, she and Amos started to form a friendship. With their love of music, they bonded, which inevitably allowed Tobias to see that Aurora really was a decent person. The relationship between Tobias and Aurora was an incredibly slow burn. Aurora was often met with what resembled contention and disdain from Tobias, who often grunted in response to her. She couldn't even get a polite smile out of him. But Aurora was persistent, and her intrigue of him overrode her fear of him kicking her out of the studio apartment. She knew he was an incredibly good-looking man. That much was for sure. But she just couldn't understand why such a catch wouldn't have a woman in his life. But the more that Aurora learned about Tobias, the more that she learned that his distance from her was purely an act of self-preservation. She also learned that he was a game warden, which seemed to be the reason for his constant absence from the house throughout the day. And little by little, Tobias would open up to her, and it all started on the agreement that he owed her for helping with the acute illness that could have cost his son his life. The repayment for that incident was giving Aurora lessons on everything there was to know about the great outdoors. And, well, honey, she didn't know nothing, so there was a lot. As Aurora ate up as much information as she could from Tobias during their lessons, he started becoming intrigued with her. He learned why she was so adamant about doing these hikes, which turned into worry over her doing them by herself. Soon, the study sessions turned into invitations for dinner at the main house, and Aurora began inching her way further into their lives. But as much as Aurora started learning about Tobias and Amos, and as much as they thought they were learning about Aurora, neither of them knew the real reason she ended up in Pagosa Springs in the first place. The only person who knew about Aurora's past was Aurora's childhood best friend Clara, who was also now her employer. The truth of her past wasn't really something she wanted anyone to know, mostly because her ex was a household name, and also because she had a lot of shame for how the relationship ended. She also worried that her ex's fame and fortune might have other people feeling intimidated by her or judging her. Aurora was adamant on leaving the past behind her, and the person that she was in Pagosa Springs was different than the person that she was before, and she was determined to keep it that way. I'm going to go ahead and finish up my makeup off camera. When I come back, I will talk about my final thoughts and opinions on this story and a little bit of information about the author who wrote this story. And I will be right back. I'm back and my makeup is done. Again, in case you are interested, today for the eyeshadow look, I used the Lust for Dusk palette. And really, my only motivation for using it was just because the color scheme reminded me of the nature and outdoors. But if you're thinking about getting this palette, this is one of Colourpop's newest palette. Every week that changes. Colourpop releases palettes like every other day. But no shade to Colourpop. I love their products. They're super affordable. And as far as the eyeshadows are concerned, their formulation is super reliable. Their mattes are easily blendable, and their shimmers are just to die for. They're cheap enough where you can buy them every other day, and it wouldn't break the bank like some of your competitors' $40, $50, $60 eyeshadow palettes. So now, let's get back to what my final thoughts and opinions are on this story. This slow burn single dad romance is a novel filled with sadness and joy. Sadness for Tobias and Aurora, who both seem to be two lost souls, terrified of letting anyone get close to them in a romantic way. They're both terrified, too, of what relationships have represented for the both of them in the past. But yet, so much joy in this story because of the acceptance that they grow to have for one another, despite the odds of them even meeting, and the abrupt introduction that almost left Aurora packing. They eventually learned to trust each other. They learned that even though people from their past had led them to such disappointment in their lives, it wasn't any indication of what a future relationship could bring to them. I really thought it was heartwarming to see Aurora befriending and building a relationship with Amos first. I think their friendship really bridged the gap for her and Tobias. And even though Tobias and Aurora were complete opposites in their personality and social skills, their journey of love started with friendship. I always think that the stories with the two main characters forming a very strong friendship and not acting on their attraction for each other for a while are always the most rewarding relationships to read about. I mean, I do love my insta-love stories, don't get me wrong, but there's something to be said about a romance novel where the two main characters meet and don't go at it like bunnies in the first few chapters. Am I right? But this kind of story is so sweet and so real and so honest. And most importantly, it just feels more relatable. I think it feels more along the lines of how a normal relationship would start. By getting to know each other, building trust, and then testing their intimacy in small and subtle ways. I found that I really rooted for Aurora because much of her past relationship experience was filled with emotional and mental abuse. She put up with it for so long because that's all she'd really known, having been with her ex for over a decade. And he really molded her into thinking that she wouldn't amount to much without him, which in turn left her feeling stuck in a relationship where she accepted only getting scraps of his attention. She never felt cherished and desired, but when she met Tobias, first introductions aside, he made her feel like she was the only woman in the world, or at least the only woman that mattered. And he proved over time how much he desired and cherished her, which in turn had me rooting for Tobias. Because once you understand his past, you understand why he is reserved and hesitant. And you also learn how amazing of a father and a human being that he is. This story is written by Mariana Zapata. I'm saying it again, and I may be butchering it again. Mariana Zapata actually lives in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, which probably helped bring a lot of authenticity to the descriptions of the little town that is Pagosa Springs. If I'm not mistaken, I think this author has written and published 12 novels, all of which are romance novels. And from what I could gather from her website, she has a penchant for writing the slow burn type romance novels. And I think that this story was definitely an indication of her gift for that. I always love finding new authors to add to my TBR list, and I'm always looking to discover new authors, and I highly doubt that that job will ever be done because there are just so many talented writers in this world. If you've read this book, let me know in the comments what you thought about it. And if you haven't read this book, be sure to check in the description box where you can find this book on Amazon. This novel is available on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read this book for free. And if you're a voracious reader like I am and you don't have Kindle Unlimited, you really should check it out. It's a great way to discover new authors without feeling like you have to take some kind of monetary risk. And new books are always being added, so you'll never run out of stories to read. This video is not sponsored, by the way. Amazon really should sponsor me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope that you check out this book. If you have any good book suggestions for me, please let me know what you want me to read. Send me an email or leave me a comment down below. I actually have a website, so if you are an author and you want me to read your book, I have an easy form that you can fill out, and I will put your book on my TBR list. So you never know, you could see your book in a video. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for your support and for your patience while I've been gone. I know it probably seemed like I gave up, but I did not. I was still reading. I just had to get my shit together, okay? You guys have a great rest of your week, and y'all stay safe out there, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.